Welcome. I'm Larry Seaman for Haverhill Community Television, and this program is called Around Town, where we try to introduce or perhaps just reacquaint you, the viewer, with the people and places of the Haverhill community. Today, we're visiting with Betty Pike, who's the curator of this fine piece of property that's known as the Whittier birthplace. So why don't we go in and join her now? Betty Pike?
How do you do?
Very good, and you?
Come on in.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
It's kind of rainy out there today, so we'll do most of the interview in here.
For one thing, that mug up there on the shelf was mentioned in Mr. Whittier's most famous poem, Snowbound. He refers to it in this way. He says that between the andiron straddling feet, the mug of cider simmered slow. And what they did apparently was to let the coals die down, fill that big mug with cold apple cider, which they then warmed over the coals, and then would pass around with the whole family drinking from the same giant mug.
And that is a very big mug. It's
It sure is.
I could use that for my coffee.
You'd never sleep if you did.
What is that device, we'll call it?
This is called a reflector oven.
Okay.
When it was in use, it would be backed up to the fire, just as you see it here.
Mm-hmm.
But what it was...
Okay, Renee, now we're inside the house here, and this is a central point of the house itself.
This is the famous fireplace from the poem Snowbound, and the kitchen the room we're in is the kitchen, the family kitchen. And so they would have been gathered around this hearth during the first part of Snowbound when you're reading the poem. And it's very interesting to see this fireplace because this is definitely a colonial style fireplace and from Thomas Whittier's day. And you think about that all of the meals that were prepared here were prepared over this open fire. In Whittier's poem about Snowbound, he describes how they had the apple orchard, how they would have had apples lined up, apples sputtered in a row, and a mug of cider simmered slow. And so they would warm a mug of cider by the fire and then pass it around. It was a large mug, and everybody would drink out of the same one. Not very sanitary, but they didn't know any better back then. Unfortunately, many New Englanders had apple orchards at the time, so while they had a surplus of apples, they weren't very valuable for trading at the market. But they would try. It was said when Whittier was older that he would drive the wagon down to Rock's Village. The ships would come that far upstream, and they would trade for goods there. And the gun and powder horn that you see on the wall here belonged to Uncle Moses. One of my favorite lines in the poem Snowbound is when Whittier describes his uncle, and he says that his uncle is innocent of books. It's a very sweet way to say Uncle Moses doesn't read. Now, we can't assume that he was illiterate. It may be that he just chose not to read, that he was more interested in fields and brooks. So he was the hunter and fisherman in the family. And Whittier, Greenleaf, and his little brother Frank liked to hang out with Uncle Moses because he was more fun than farming. Going hunting and fishing was more fun. Yeah. We have here an example of what a flax plant looks like. The Whittiers raised flax in the upper field and had a herd of sheep, so they made all of their own linen and woolen clothing, bedding, everything they needed in textiles from scratch. So this is an example of what the plant looks like. It would get quite a bit taller, maybe about 3 feet before harvest time. When it's cut down, allowed to dry, and then crushed at the mill, it divides into very fine fibers. And then those fibers can be spun on a spinning wheel like this one. This is a flax wheel. It's a treadle wheel. It has a pedal at the bottom to make it go. Whittier's mother typically kept her spinning wheel here beside the fire, so she could enjoy the stories being told in the evening while she was doing her spinning. So the thread that we spin from this plant then becomes linen. So linen material is made from flax. This metal object here, it's not the Tin Man, that is a reflector oven, and it would be positioned just like it is in front of the open fire. The back of this is open, and the rounded metal then reflects the heat. So that's where it gets its name, reflector oven. You'll notice that inside in the middle here, there's a spit. So say Uncle Moses has gone out with his musket and got him a rabbit. You would see the pointed in here. You would put it on the spit and set it back in front of the fire. And then you see on the other side here that it's a rotisserie. You could position and turn the meat so that it's cooking all the way around. So there is the rotisserie. Now while it's sitting in front of the fire, if you wanted to see if it needed to be turned, you didn't have to move it away. You could just peek in the door. So, and you know when you cook on a grill, Larry, and the grease drops on the coals and flames shoot up. And you can imagine her with a dress all the way to the ground. If the grease from this piece of meat was rolling into that fire, it would be shooting flames at her. So they had a safety feature in this, and that the bottom is bowl-shaped. And if it began to get too full, you'll see there's a spout in the side. So she could pull it away from the fire and pour the grease out. So the grease is never making it into the fire.
Ingenious.
They had a lot of things to make it safer for them to work around the fire. The women spent most of their day here. Of course, one we're all familiar with is the pot crane. The pots, there's no stove to set the pots on top of. They had to hang directly over the fire. But you don't want to put your hand over the fire to stir your soup. So the pots could be swung out here for her to tend to them, and then for them to cook, she would swing it back in over the fire. Let's take a look in the parlor where Whittier was born. This is the parlor, the fanciest room of the house. This is where they would serve company tea. But because they often had overnight visitors, they had a fold-away bed, and this was the guest room. So it would be a tea room by the day and an extra bedroom at night. The beds are replacements, even though they're period pieces. But the Whittiers had a folding bed. It would fold, and then in addition, it had a hook that hooked it to the wall. So this was the guest room and also the boarding room. So this is the room the poet was born in, December 17th, 1807. You know the story about rope beds, Larry?
No, I don't.
At that time, what we have on our bed is a box spring. In their days was the ropes. The ropes took place of that. And you can see that they get very loose, in particular since they didn't have synthetic materials like we do. Well, eventually you'll feel like you're sleeping in a hammock, which if you've ever tried, it's comfortable for maybe 10 minutes, but not all day long or all night long. So they had a special tool. This tool is called a rope key. It has a slot there so that you could get a good hold of the rope, and you would give it a twist to tighten the rope and pull the slack out. You would start at one end, you would work your way all the way back down to the knots and retie it. And that's where we get the expression, sleep tight.
Is that right?
Their mattresses in that time were like a giant pillowcase. The bottom or the short edge was open like a pillowcase, and so in the wintertime it would be stuffed with horsehair or sheep wool. In the summer that'd be way too hot. They'd pull that out, go out to the barn and get some straw and refill the mattress. So I imagine that's where the bed bug part comes in. That straw's been in the barn.